It was a love affair born in the Bayou.
She's a stunning young woman. She came from a very loving family. She had a beautiful smile that just took you in.
He took one look at her and fell head over heels.
Together, their lives seemed unstoppable. Until a daylight abduction hit them like a hurricane.
There's a woman missing. Her family wants to know where she is, and we have got to close in this circle. So when you hear the word kidnapping, everybody's immediately on guard.
But as a stunned community holds its breath, a family springs into action.
The family pulled out all the stops, four-wheelers, social media, whatever they could use to search for their loved one, they did.
As they're speeding on the ATVs toward the home, they hear this screaming.
I'm hearing a holler, help, you're killing me, you're killing me.
That's when the first shot was fired.
There are some times where everything just immediately gets cranked up to 10, and that was this case.
Everything happened so fast, or nobody knew what was going on inside that house.
But shock and confusion definitely was the main thing in that moment.
November 6, 2013. It's a warm, humid afternoon in the capital of Cajun country, Lafayette, Louisiana.
Yeah, Cajun Creole kind of style, we're good for the food, hospitality, and just always having a great time, very friendly.
Down on Madeline Street, Lafayette resident Demetria Robinson is heading home after her shift.
It was a normal November day. I had just gotten off of work.
Demetria crosses the street to her house, and shortly after she gets home, she hears a commotion outside of the community daycare facility across the street.
I was standing outside, and I just hear noise, and I just seen this car, and this woman, she was blowing her horn. And I was like, what's going on?
All of a sudden, you see two adults fighting. There's a woman literally trying to fight for her life, pleading for help.
Please help.
Pleading for anyone to help her and her child.
Leave her alone.
He's on top of her, and the baby is under her.
Mind your business.
And her eyes just looking at me saying help. But in that same instant, you look at the baby, he's crying, looking at me. It was just a crazy situation.
In that split second, Demetria makes a fateful decision.
I said a little prayer to myself. I said, God, just help me to get the baby. If you want me to get the baby, just help me. In some kind of way, I was just able to just get the baby. And I made sure the baby was okay. And I took him into safety.
The man took the woman and drove off, holding onto the steering wheel and her by the back of her head. So a lot of questions are running through people's mind, but through it all, they are in shock and they are confused.
Within minutes, Lafayette dispatchers are flooded with 911 calls.
There's a man beating a woman over here.
Police race to the scene of the attack and are immediately thrust into an unbelievable manhunt where every last second counts and where one young mother's life hangs in the balance between life and death.
In southern Louisiana, no one will ever forget the name Bethany Arsenault.
Born in 1983, Bethany Arsenault was raised in Duson, Louisiana, a small farming community on the outskirts of Lafayette.
It's country. It's very country, and everybody's related. Everybody's related in the area. Everybody knows everybody.
The Arsenault clan was no different, and Bethany grew up surrounded by a large extended family.
She had this big, tight-knit family. There were always lots of cousins and friends around, cookouts, family dinners, and they genuinely loved and supported one another.
By the time Bethany entered high school, she had grown into a beautiful young woman with electric eyes and a magnetic personality.
Bethany was really a strikingly beautiful young lady. She was 5'8", had these glowing eyes, and just exuded an alluring, attractive energy.
She was smart, sweet, drop-dead gorgeous, and of course, more than one young man found her irresistible.
Like a lot of young women her age, after high school, Bethany dated a few guys, but true love remained elusive.
During her early 20s, she worked and had a couple of boyfriends, but for whatever reason, those relationships didn't work out.
She came from a great family. She wanted a family of her own someday, but of course, it's not always easy to find Mr. Right, especially in a small town.
But then in 2010, at the age of 26,
Hey, Bethany.
Bethany ran into an old family friend,
My friend Scott, right?
Yes.
Scott Thomas.
Scott and Bethany had met a few years earlier. He was friends with her cousin Marcus, and her brother Victor knew him.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Long time no see.
Like Bethany, he was 26, hardworking, and came from a good family in nearby Leonville, Louisiana. Scott was charming, funny, and sweet. And best of all, he was single like her.
So when me and you gonna hang out?
We're hanging out right now.
I'm talking one-on-one time.
So.
Soon? I hope it's sooner than later.
Given Scott's history with her family, there was a real comfort level between them. Bethany felt like she could trust him, that he was a good guy, and when they went out together, they just clicked.
Their connection was just electric and immediate, and Scott just couldn't spend enough time with Bethany.
He was a guy in love.
They were both young, good-looking, and fun. They spent a lot of time together.
Within a few months, Scott and Bethany moved into a home together in Leonville, Louisiana, about 30 miles from Bethany's family.
This is what Scott wanted. He wanted them to live together. He wanted them to build a family together.
A wish that came true in 2011 when their son Jackson was born.
Scott and Bethany had a beautiful little boy. And like any couple with a new baby, at that time, they were very, very happy together.
But as much as Scott and Bethany adored their son, life under the same roof wasn't always perfect.
Scott loved Bethany very much, but he could be a little emotionally up and down, a little suffocating, and on top of all that, Bethany was used to being closer to her family and was feeling a little disconnected.
Ultimately, in June of 2013, they both decided it would be best if they went their separate ways. Scott stayed in Leonville, and Bethany went back to Tucson to be closer to her family.
They shared custody. Bethany had primary custody, but Scott was definitely in the picture.
Bethany was working with him. He was seeing his son. She just didn't want it to be involved with him on an intimate level.
Honestly, it seemed like they were back to being good friends, family friends, who just so happened to have a beautiful young son together.
But just when it seemed like Bethany and Scott were back on even keel, a shocking chain of events ripped their lives apart. It begins that fateful November day in 2013.
Here is this beautiful young mother attacked and abducted in broad daylight.
It was just a crazy situation.
A situation that would leave a community holding its breath and wondering what kind of monster might be lurking in their midst.
This was the third abduction in a year in the community, and there was a real fear that the same person was responsible.
After a mutual breakup with her boyfriend, Scott Thomas, newly single mother Bethany Arsenault was ready and willing to take on the world.
She was a beautiful 29-year-old woman. She had an adorable son, and she had her whole life in front of her.
But just as life was looking up, an unspeakable horror rips Bethany's life apart.
On November 6, 2013, Bethany was violently abducted outside a daycare center in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Everybody was really shocked and believed that's happening.
There was a lot of confusion as to just what was going on. Whether it was a kidnapping, a carjacking. All that was known was that a male had a female and took off with her. And there was a child involved, and the child had been rescued.
As responding officers try to ascertain the situation, eyewitnesses describe a chaotic and violent scene.
What did you see step by step?
I saw her get out the car with her son, and then he started pushing her into his car.
They said that there was an African-American male between 5'10", 6 feet tall. He grabbed the woman, threw her in the vehicle. It was a white Buick LeSabre.
It happened like so fast. I don't even remember seeing his face. The only thing that really sticks in my head is that girl eyes.
The police put out a statewide APB on the vehicle, but they only had a vague description of this man, and they had no idea what his motivations were.
And as for the car at the scene, police trace it back to Bethany Arsenault.
People don't know if these two know each other. Is this just a random guy? Is he someone who escaped from prison? Or is he a rapist?
So many things could have been going through their heads. You never know what could happen to that woman, to Bethany.
But as questions about Bethany's abduction begin to swirl, investigators are forced to face a sad new fact about life in Lafayette.
Lafayette is a pretty safe town. Like everywhere, it's got its good areas and its bad areas. But in the last few years, there have been some very upsetting crimes involving young women.
Mickey Shunick, a young woman riding her bicycle one night. She was forced into the vehicle, but that was one of the biggest cases here. Unfortunately, she was found in a shallow grave out in the middle of nowhere.
The Mickey Shunick case was a case that resonated with a lot of people. So when you hear the word kidnapping, everybody's immediately on guard, and they're thinking, what's the information that we need to know? What do we need to be on the lookout for?
But Mickey Shunick wasn't the only young woman to vanish from the area. 16-year-old Kiosha Felix also went missing in April of 2012. And Kiosha's case has even more parallels with Bethany's.
Like Bethany, Kiosha was from Tucson, Louisiana.
She was also mother of a 1-year-old. She vanished into thin air. The majority believe that she was either kidnapped or held against her will.
The answer as to where is Kiosha Felix is something that the community as a whole is still asking.
Consequently, authorities fear Bethany's abduction may not be an isolated incident.
This could be part of a pattern. It could be the work of a serial kidnapper, or even worse, a serial killer.
So in this instance, police have information about other missing persons cases in the area. They have details about these cases that the family members don't have that may be relevant to this case. And they have to seriously consider, are these crimes related?
I think that's when everybody was alarmed that it really was a scary situation.
As the search for Bethany intensifies, news of her abduction rolls across the local airwaves.
Our thought was, here's a missing person, here's a family that needs help. Let's get them the help they need.
It just made you wonder what was going on. And after I found out there was a little boy involved, it was just the sense of having a little boy of my own. What's gonna happen to him now? Is his mom gonna be found? What's gonna happen? And then that's when it takes on a different aspect.
As fear spreads through the community, detectives reach out to the Arsenault family to inform them that Bethany has been abducted.
Their loved one was missing and they had no earthly idea where she was.
When you have a very close member of your family that's in that type of imminent danger, you want to do what you have to do to find her.
They were going to do everything in their power to find her, one way or the other.
In a community where blood is thicker than water, there's hope that Bethany's family will be able to find her. But with a trio of young women now missing, would their efforts be too little, too late?
I just thought in my mind that she was dead.
"29-year-old Louisiana mom Bethany Arsenault hasn't been seen in the past couple of hours since an unknown assailant forced her into his car outside a daycare in Lafayette, Louisiana. And with 2 other local women missing and presumed dead, everyone in this quiet town is beginning to fear the worst.
Everyone's extremely worried about Bethany. This is a very public kidnapping, a very violent event, and no one knows where Bethany is, who did it, or even if she's still alive.
If it is a kidnapping, there are 2 people involved. There's the kidnapper and then there's the victim. The sooner you can find out what's going on, the sooner you can close in that circle.
With the clock ticking, Bethany's family hits the streets in search of their missing loved one.
She came from a large, loving family. I mean, the number of people out there searching for her, not giving up hope. They knew that also she was a fighter and wouldn't give up.
Hello? Hi. This is my cousin Bethany. She's been missing since yesterday. Have you seen her?
No, I haven't. I know y'all from around here, though. Such a good family. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help.
Thanks.
It was a large-scale effort. You did have Lafayette police, and you also had the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Office searching for her. And then the family was really doing a full-scale search. The family is doing everything that they can. We've had it in the paper. It's been on television. The police have put out alerts. So it's a community effort.
While Bethany's family goes door to door, investigators are still looking into the possibility that her case could be connected to the disappearances of Mickey Shunick and Kiosha Felix.
Like Bethany, these were 2 attractive women who just up and disappeared. So is it possible that the same person could be responsible for all 3 crimes?
But when investigators search for similarities between Bethany's disappearance and that of Mickey Shunick, they quickly hit a dead end.
Right away, they can eliminate any connection between Bethany's case and that of 21-year-old Mickey Shunick because a registered sex offender had been arrested and charged with Mickey's death. And at the time of Bethany's disappearance, he was behind bars.
However, Kiosha Felix's case isn't so cut and dry.
The answer as to where is Kiosha Felix is something that we and the journalistic community and the community as a whole is still asking.
She just disappeared into thin air.
Law enforcement probably wouldn't want to call it a cold case because I'm sure they're doing everything that they can, but the dozens of times that I checked up with law enforcement about it, there have been no leads.
While it's possible the individual who kidnapped Kiosha also abducted Bethany, there are some glaring differences between the perp's MO in each case.
Kiosha basically vanished into thin air. No one had seen her alleged kidnapping. It was the opposite of Bethany's abduction.
This was brazen in every sense of the word, not only because of the time of day, but with certain kidnappings, things are planned out. There is thought that has gone into it. This just seemed like either someone had snapped or someone had had enough.
But just who in Lafayette would want to abduct and perhaps kill Bethany Arsenault?
People don't know if these 2 know each other. Are they friends? Are they lovers? Is this just a random guy and they're trying to figure out what to do?
Before investigators have time to zero in on a suspect, officers stumble upon a huge discovery.
It looks like that white car they were looking for earlier.
On the night of November 6th, just 9 miles from the scene of Bethany's kidnapping, police found an abandoned white Buick LeSabre behind an oil production facility in Tucson. It was a rural area surrounded by woods and sugarcane fields.
They immediately searched the area and find a woman's shirt on the ground and find additional clothing and blood in the vehicle.
I've got a footprint.
When authorities arrived, they saw 2 sets of footprints heading into the fields.
Somebody's barefoot and they're heading into the sugar cane.
But tracking the prints at night through towering sugarcane fields is no easy task.
That area, you look in sugarcane, probably 5.5, 6 foot tall. I mean, growing up as kids, we used to go play in it, treat it like a maze. It's very easy to run inside sugarcane and get lost.
Coupled with the challenges of the landscape, a recent rain had just fallen in the area.
They were not able to find any leads, and it probably had something to do with the weather conditions.
Because sunspots were still wet. Those fields hold water. But as far as to find footprints inside there, it's pretty rare.
Even though the footprints don't pan out, officers have better luck with the abandoned vehicle.
When police ran the plates on the Buick, they found that it belonged to Bethany's ex-boyfriend, Scott Thomas.
But could the doting father of Bethany's young son truly be behind her shocking abduction? If so, just what had pushed him over the brink? As investigators press for answers, an unexpected call is about to reignite a family's fading hope.
The family and authorities and volunteers are out searching tirelessly for Bethany. Then all of a sudden, the sister gets a phone call, and it's Bethany.
Police in Lafayette, Louisiana have just made a disturbing discovery in the search for beautiful mother Bethany Arsenault, who has been missing for 3 hours.
Law enforcement found Bethany's ex-boyfriend Scott Thomas's car abandoned in a rural part of Doosan, Louisiana. The vehicle had women's clothing and blood in it.
When the authorities did find the car, they did see some footprints. They kind of followed where that went. However, the footsteps did not lead them in any path to locate Bethany or Scott or have any clues as to where they ended up.
While authorities intensify their manhunt, investigators try to determine what may have sparked this violent abduction. As detectives speak to Bethany's family, they uncover a troubling truth.
Bethany was in a relationship with Scott, and it was a violent relationship.
To friends, co-workers, and the larger Lafayette community, this revelation comes as a shock.
From the outside looking in, they looked like friends. Ex-boyfriend and girlfriend, but friends who cared about the well-being of the child they had together.
Bethany's cousin Marcus tells detectives he was afraid for her safety.
Marcus says that he actually moved in with Bethany because she had received threats from Thomas in the past. So obviously there was some tension there.
Like his mood swings would be like quick, fast, in a hurry.
It seems like he wasn't a bad guy. I don't think that anyone thought that he would take it to the extremes that he did.
Bethany's brother Victor also describes Scott's jealous tendencies to detectives.
Like, that's just how he was. Like, he was so, like, he was just insecure, I guess. Like, you know, like, it's just crazy.
Just calm down.
You think I'm stupid?
God, what are you talking about?
As soon as I leave, you gonna go to somebody else.
That doesn't even make sense, Scott. You know what? I can't even talk about this.
Nah, you ain't going nowhere.
Scott!
He's becoming more possessive. He was monitoring her every move, and when she wasn't there or where she would normally be, he would be there. He's definitely out to cause her harm.
Said you ain't going nowhere. You hear me?
He was very abusive and, struck her, threatened to kill her and her child, drug her by her hair. He was, known to have a pattern of violence.
And how long did this go on?
For more than 2 years, family members say Bethany kept the abuse a secret. But eventually, they began to suspect something was very wrong.
She wouldn't go out, ever. She wouldn't do things she used to do. But I started catching on to it after I started hearing a little little things, you know?
There's a lot of shame and embarrassment for victims of domestic violence. A lot of times the victim of the abuse is being told that it's their fault they're being abused, and they start to believe it. It's a very shameful feeling for them, and it's not uncommon for them to keep it from their loved ones.
There was a lot of abuse, and she would leave, come back, leave and come back. And she finally had enough in June, and she reported him to authorities because he threatened to kill her.
Fearing for her safety and that of their young child, Bethany moved out of the Leonville house and filed a restraining order against Scott.
She told me, I'm really scared because he really is crazy.
Bethany moved in with her mother, but she had to return to Scott's house to retrieve some things. When she did, Scott made a scene. Law enforcement was called and Scott was arrested.
He was like, Bethany, I'm gonna get you here. I'm gonna get you here.
After his arrest, Scott was apologetic, and he made it clear to Bethany that he intended to change his life for the better, and he hoped that Bethany would allow him back in her life.
We know that she was in a relationship that had involved domestic violence. She made a report to authorities. However, the person that she made the report against was the father of her child. She would leave, come back, leave and come back, and she finally had enough.
According to Bethany's brother, Victor, that was a bitter pill for Scott to swallow.
He wouldn't tell me exactly, I'm a kill myself, but he would always like, I can't live like this. He just had in his mind, like if he couldn't be with Bethany, nobody could be with Bethany.
For detectives, it's now clear Scott Thomas is their man. But if Bethany is Scott's captive, they know there may not be much time to save her.
No one even knows that Bethany is still alive. This guy sounds suicidal, and it's quite possible he's planning to kill Bethany and himself.
Several hours into the search, when it seems the stakes couldn't get any higher, Bethany's sister receives an unexpected call.
Hello? Oh my God, Bethany.
Listen, I need you to take care of my son. Please tell me that you'll take care of my son.
What? Where are you? Where are you?
Just promise me.
Bethany, where are you? Bethany.
While it's reassuring to know Bethany is still alive, the sense of relief is fleeting.
The sister doesn't know where her sister's calling from, what's going on, but those words, take care of my son, kind of implies like, hey, this is it. It's your responsibility because I'm not going to be here anymore.
But as one family's worst nightmare continues to unfold, another equally shocking development takes the case in an even more unbelievable direction.
One of the younger cousins went to see the psychic.
She said, don't go too far. Bethany is still in the area.
Nearly 24 hours, Bethany Arsenault has been missing in southern Louisiana. A surprise phone call has just revealed that Bethany is still alive, but for how long, no one knows.
Bethany was with Scott, and it was a violent relationship. He threatened to kill her, and based on his actions, he definitely intended to do so.
Ain't going nowhere, you hear me?
Desperate to find Bethany before it's too late, her family and friends step up their already intensive search.
They rallied together, and maybe 100 of them were out there searching, on foot, on four-wheelers, combing almost the entire city, almost the entire Lafayette parish.
The tension was very thick. They were just so upset by her disappearance.
By the morning of November 8th, exhausted friends, family, and authorities are beginning to wonder if Scott Thomas hasn't already fled Lafayette Parish, having either dragged Bethany with him or left her for dead in the Louisiana Bayou.
Authorities, once they found the footsteps, they used multiple things. They used drones, used cadaver dogs. and they were not able to find any lead.
But just as their hopes are fading, Bethany's family receives a tip from a most unusual source.
One of the younger cousins went to see the psychic, and the reading said that she was in the general area where the car was.
The woman told them to look by a body of water.
Heeding the psychic's advice, Bethany's family, including Victor and Marcus Arsenault, hightail it back towards the location where Scott's car was found 2 days before. There, they encounter a local resident named Kenneth Alleman.
Howdy. What can I do for you, sir?
Hey, we're looking for my niece, and we spoke to a psychic, and she said that she was not too far from where her car is, just like right up the way. Said something else about a body of water.
They said one of her family members, he believes in psychics real good, and she told him that she was still alive and she was near a body of water. And when he said body of water, the first thing that came into my mind, they have a pond, which was about maybe 400 yards from there, which we called Anderson Pond. So we figured that would be the next place that we needed to go.
It's a little ways that way. I can show you if you'd like.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right, well, let's go.
But on their way to the pond, the men run into a local farmer.
Where y'all headed? Anderson Pond. We're looking for that missing girl.
Ow! You guys checked all around these abandoned houses and everything?
They said, yes, we searched all the abandoned houses on this road, but we didn't find nothing. And that's when he pointed to the house in the middle of the field and asked them if they had searched there. And they said, no. They said, we didn't even know there was a house there.
At first glance, you'd never think that there was a home there. It looks like a bunch of trees, bushes, overgrown grass.
I guess we'll check that first.
It was kind of a weird feeling, almost like something you only see in the movies. We got there and everybody just kind of stopped and looked at each other and like, what are we supposed to do now? What happens now?
Hey, check out the back.
He was going towards the back of the house, and then that's when she started screaming.
Hang up right here, okay?
Hearing Bethany's cries for help, her cousin Marcus takes action.
Marcus breaks it open, and at that point he could hear Bethany scream.
Bethany! Bethany, is he on? Where are you? Bethany!
He had a knife to her throat and he started, stabbing her, in essence, in the throat and in the head.
Scott, stop! Scott, stop!
And at that point he opened fire.
Marcus!
When she started screaming, everything happened so fast. And everything, the gunfire and everything, everybody scattering at the same time, everybody hollering for the police. None of us knew what was going on. Nobody knew what was going on inside that house.
In the morning hours of November 8th, 2013, the search for 29-year-old single mother Bethany Arsenault has come to a head as a hail of gunfire erupts from inside an abandoned farmhouse just outside her hometown of Tucson, Louisiana.
When we heard the shots, we didn't know where the shooting was coming from. We just know that one of the guys ran towards the back of the house. So we didn't know if there was gunfire between the two or if it was just one single gun. We didn't know what was going on.
Though it seems like an eternity, seconds after the shooting stops, a figure emerges from the home.
And I noticed her cousin come around the corner with her, and everybody just, once we saw that, we just all kind of took a deep breath in. It was bloody. I mean, she had blood coming from her head and her neck and everything. We saw the knife wounds to her neck. We saw the knife wounds in her head. And we knew she needed to get to the hospital quick.
But as serious as Bethany's wounds appear, When first responders arrive, they quickly ascertain that her injuries are not life-threatening, and fortunately, she's going to survive.
Everyone is clapping, they're cheering, they're hugging each other. So it was a moment of triumph.
With Bethany now en route to a hospital, a team of officers cautiously enters the abandoned farmhouse.
Clear right.
Officers don't know if Scott Thomas is truly dead or if he's still alive, armed, and dangerous.
Moments later, they find his lifeless body in a bedroom.
Body left. Angle 7, starting major crimes in the detective police.
The scene is nothing short of pure carnage.
There's blood everywhere. There are bullet casings everywhere. It looks like the shootout at the OK Corral.
No pulse.
Bethany's cousin, Marcus Arsenault, had in fact shot Scott Thomas 11 times.
When Marcus eventually sits down with detectives, he describes why Scott had left him little choice.
They kicked down the door, went into the bedroom, and there Scott was on top of Bethany, stabbing her.
They tussling, which somehow, she's like, he stabbed me. Mama, he killing me. Help me. He stabbed me in my head. He stabbed me.
When the first shot hit him, he kept stabbing her.
I shot him in the leg. I shot and I hit him in the ribs. I hit him in the ribs. That's when he dropped the knife.
He had to strike him 11 times before Bethany was able to free herself from his grip. That's how strong and possessive he was. He was being shot numerous times, but he was intent on causing her physical harm and killing her.
But just how lucky Bethany is to be alive doesn't become clear until 11 days later, when she's able to speak with detectives. According to Bethany, it all began on the afternoon of November 6th, 2013.
So although she had a restraining order against him, she did have shared custody. This was a prearranged meeting, and as they would do whenever it was her time to pick up her son, they would meet in a neutral location.
Apparently, as this exchange is occurring, he made some sort of advance towards Bethany.
He was trying to talk to me and trying to hug me, and I was like, no, Scott, I'm leaving. He just went crazy. And I know how Scott do, and he was mad or whatever. So I seen him in my rear view. He was speeding, like following me, chasing me. So I went to the closest place I knew, and that was daycare.
So Scott chases Bethany to the daycare. He's yelling, he's screaming, and he throws Bethany in the car just after a Good Samaritan is able to grab her son and takes off.
Scott was able to snatch Bethany and throw her into his vehicle and drive off, holding onto his steering wheel and then grabbing Bethany's hair so she could not break free.
He was just mad. You see what you made me do? You see what you made me do?
Bethany says Scott then marched her through the adjacent sugarcane fields.
They hid out in the ditch while the family, our police officers, roamed right up and down the street, feet away from them. Of course, he threatened to kill her if she was to make a sound.
He basically drug her through the woods that first night of the kidnapping, and then eventually he drug her to this house.
Bethany's time in that home was like a living hell. It was worse than prison. He watched her every move.
There was a lone mattress in the corner of a room, very little sunlight, and I believe a jug of water may have been left behind for some years, I'm sure.
The first night she was forced to sleep on the floor under a dirty carpet while he had a knife to her throat.
I couldn't move. I couldn't do nothing because he would threaten to kill me, and he kept saying he had a gun. He had a gun. And when we would sleep, he would sleep with a knife around my throat.
I know that he kept her for those 2 days without any food or water. Torture.
But Bethany says that even in her weakened state, she continued to fight for her life.
The first day there, she was trying to go into the restroom, and she was like, you know what, I'm not gonna let this guy just, hold me here. So she got a curtain rod and tried to hit him upside the head. And, it just bounced off. Her second day, she was using the restroom, and she took a piece of wood and tried to break free by knocking out the window, but we caught her.
To make matters worse, Bethany says that with each passing hour, Scott was growing more and more unstable.
He would cry and say he should have just loved me. Why he just didn't love me. He would get angry. He would get mad. He kept saying he was going to kill me, and then he was going to kill himself.
His emotions and mood varied. And even at one point, Bethany said he became paranoid. And she said that she sensed that he kind of regretted that it got that far, but it was too late for him to turn back. Throughout the whole ordeal, he made it known that his main intention was to kill her, but they were going to die together.
Then, on the morning of November 8th, a glimmer of hope appeared.
They woke up, they both heard the ATVs, and he was like, "Oh, it's your family, they're coming for you." And he put her on the bed and he held a knife to her as the family neared. And then he said, "We're about to die."
Bethany knows this might be her last chance to survive this ordeal, and she just starts screaming.
All I felt was him trying to slice my neck. So I kept hollering, "Help, help. He's killing me, help, help."
Moments later, it was all over.
So Marcus kept saying, "Let her go, Scott, let her go." And he kept trying to slice my neck. And I kept hollering, "No, Marcus, help me. He's trying to kill me. He's trying to kill me. Please help me." And Scott didn't say nothing. Lamar fired the gun.
Everything had to have fallen into place for this story to end how it did. The fact that from the moment this happened, the family and the community came together and they fought to get her back. She came out bloodied, she came out scarred, but she came out of it.
Following Bethany's statement, on April 23, 2014, a Louisiana grand jury formally clears her cousin Marcus of any wrongdoing in the shooting death of Scott Thomas.
Everyone thought that Marcus did the right thing. Law enforcement did end up saying that it was a justifiable homicide. And I believe had they not, it would have been public outrage.
And though Bethany and her family are still reeling from the terrible aftermath of her violent abduction, everyone knows the final outcome could have been far, far worse.
It was just courageous and brave effort by the entire family.
I believe that everyone thought that Marcus did the right thing. The fact that she made it out of this and, was saved by her family, reunited with her son, it's just the ultimate story of survival.
Scott was hoping that he would die with Bethany. Throughout the whole ordeal, he made it known that his main intention was they were going to die together. It definitely was a case of, if I can't have you, no one will.
It wasn't exactly a sigh of relief.
The soil beneath the manicured lawns of suburban tranquility hides more than just the roots of ancient trees. It hides the sins we were too afraid to look for. In a town where neighbors exchanged pleasantries over picket fences and children played until the streetlights flickered to life, the disappearance of Elena Vance in the summer of 1998 was a wound that refused to close. She was 17, a girl with dreams as bright as the August sun, until she vanished into the humid evening air, leaving behind a half-finished book on a park bench and a silence that would swallow the town whole. For 28 years, that silence remained unbroken, a heavy, suffocating blanket that dampened the spirit of a community, turning the memory of Elena into a ghost story whispered in darkened rooms, a cold case that defied the passing of time and the erosion of hope. The investigation in 1998 was a frantic symphony of errors, a desperate scramble through the dense woods and the winding creeks that bordered the Vance property. Detectives paced the floors of the local precinct, their faces etched with the fatigue of 1,000 dead ends, while the town turned its gaze inward, suspicion blossoming like a toxic weed in the cracks of the social order. Every stranger was a suspect. Every locked door was a vault of secrets. Every shadow was a potential witness to a crime that had left no trace, no blood, no struggle, just an empty space where a girl should have been. The lead investigator, a man named Arthur Sterling, would spend the rest of his career haunted by the image of Elena's bicycle, abandoned at the edge of the driveway, a lonely sentinel guarding a driveway that led nowhere. As the years ground on, the urgency of the initial search faded into the dull ache of a long-term mystery. The Vance family home, once a vibrant hub of laughter and light, withered under the weight of an absence that grew louder with every passing season. Elena's mother, Martha, became a fixture of the local landscape, a woman walking the same circuitous path every afternoon, her eyes scanning the horizon for a figure that never materialized. The town moved on, as towns do, burying their trauma under the veneer of progress, yet the cold case of Elena Vance remained in jagged shard in the collective psyche, a reminder that some things, once lost, are not merely misplaced, they are stolen by the darkness. Then came the spring of 2026, a season marked by relentless, driving rain that turned the earth into a sodden, shifting landscape. A homeowner on Elm Street, looking to expand a patio that had long been cracked and uneven, hired a crew to excavate the backyard, a plot of land that had once been part of the vast, overgrown estate of the neighboring property, the very property where the primary suspect, a reclusive handyman named Elias Thorne, had lived before he passed away in the early 2000s. As the mechanical claw of the backhoe bit deep into the clay, it hit something that didn't sound like rock or root. It was a dull, hollow thud that stopped the work dead. The workers peered into the trench, their flashlights cutting through the gloom to reveal a scene that would rewrite the history of the town. It wasn't just a skeleton. It was an altar of memory, preserved in the airtight embrace of the clay. Beside the remains, tucked into a rotted metal box that had somehow survived the crushing weight of decades, were the personal items that made the identification swift and devastating: a silver locket with the initials Evie engraved in delicate, flowing script, a high school class ring, and a set of keys that had been missing for over a quarter of a century. The discovery sent a seismic shock through the town, a jolt of reality that brought the past crashing into the present, turning the long-buried secret into a glaring, undeniable truth. The backyard had become the final page of a book everyone thought had been closed, and the ending was more horrific than anyone had dared to imagine. Detectives swarmed the site, their uniforms stark against the backdrop of the suburban garden, as the forensic teams worked with the precision of surgeons, peeling back the layers of time to uncover the truth of what had happened that August night. The identification was almost immediate, a cold, clinical confirmation that pierced the hearts of those who had held onto the flicker of hope for 3 decades. Elena Vance was home, but she was not the girl they remembered. She was a casualty of a predator who had lived right under their noses, a man who had participated in the searches, who had consoled the neighbors, and who had slept soundly in the house next door while his victim lay beneath his feet. The investigation moved with a predatory focus, the detectives digging into the life of Elias Thorne, whose death years earlier had seemed to end the question of his guilt. Now his legacy was being unpicked, thread by thread, revealing a man who had been a master of the mundane, a predator who hid his depravity behind the dull, unassuming mask of a handyman. His journals, found in a forgotten attic box, were a harrowing catalog of his obsessions, detailed accounts of his surveillance, his lures, and the moments when he had finally snatched the life he had coveted. He had not just killed her. He had claimed her, keeping her close in the dark earth, an eternal secret that he carried to his own grave. The revelation turned the town inside out, the shock manifesting as a wave of collective trauma that redefined every relationship, every memory, and every assumption of safety. People looked at their neighbors and didn't see friends. They saw potential shadows, wondering who else was wearing a mask, who else was hiding a history that would make the blood run cold. The memorial service for Elena, held in the same park where she was last seen, was not a celebration of her life, but a reckoning with the darkness that had stolen it, a somber, weeping assembly of a town that had finally been forced to confront the monster in their midst. The aftermath was a slow, agonizing process of unearthing the truth of their own complicity, the ways in which they had enabled the predator by ignoring the signs, by valuing their own comfort over the pursuit of the truth, and by choosing not to look too closely at the man who was always there, always quiet, always watchful. The detectives spent months mapping the extent of Thorne's reach, finding evidence of other near misses, other stalking patterns, other lives that had been narrowly spared the same fate. It was a dark, exhaustive audit of the town's history, a deep dive into the reservoir of secrets that had been accumulating for 30 years. Even now, months after the remains were identified, the town of Oakhaven, the name synonymous with the nightmare, remains a place where the air feels thin, the shadows longer, and the silence deeper. The backyard on Elm Street is now a field of wildflowers, a place of forced beauty over a site of profound violation, but no one goes there and no one talks about it. The case is solved by the standards of the law, but for the people of Oakhaven, the mystery of how such evil could walk among them, how it could build a home in their own soil, remains a haunting, unanswerable question that keeps them up at night. The story of Elena Vance is no longer just a cold case. It is the definitive history of the town, a narrative arc that ends not in resolution, but in an enduring, jagged realization of the fragility of the peace they once took for granted. They look at the streetlights, at the park benches, at the quiet houses, and they see the ghosts of the past, the echoes of the girl who never came home, and the shadow of the man who decided her fate. The nightmare is over, yet it has become a permanent part of the landscape, a lesson written in the cold, unyielding earth, warning them that some secrets are never truly lost. They are only waiting for the rain to wash them into the light. The transition from the discovery of the remains to the systematic dismantling of Elias Thorne's hidden life was not a process of revelation, but an agonizing process of autopsy. As the crime scene tape remained fluttering in the relentless wind, the detectives transitioned from the physical excavation to the psychological one. They began to pull apart the house Thorne had inhabited, a structure that was now viewed not as a home, but as a monument to a long-conceived deception. Every corner, every crawl space, every floorboard was examined with a fervor that bordered on the religious. They were not looking for another body, though the fear that there might be others gripped the town like a frost. They were looking for the why, the internal mechanics of a man who had successfully performed the role of a neighbor for 3 decades while concealing a murder in his own backyard. The investigators found the journals tucked behind a loose panel in the foundation of the home, a collection of composition notebooks that smelled of damp earth and rot. These weren't just logs. They were chronicles of a predatory evolution. The earliest entries dated back to the year before Elena Vance disappeared, detailing her movements with an intimacy that made the lead investigator, Arthur Sterling, physically recoil. Thorne had documented her habits, her route to school, the specific time she liked to sit on the bench in the park. He wrote of her with a chilling, clinical admiration, framing his obsession as a form of divine predestination. As Sterling read the cramped, spiderweb handwriting, he realized that Elena hadn't been a target of opportunity. She had been the centerpiece of a meticulously orchestrated hunt. The town, meanwhile, was experiencing a profound dissolution of its reality. The innocent suburb narrative was being stripped away, revealing a hollow core where trust used to reside. Families who had lived on Elm Street for 20 years began to look at their own property lines with suspicion. If a monster could bury a girl 10 feet from a patio and remain undetected for nearly 30 years, what else was buried? What other secrets were being kept by the people they waved to every morning? The atmosphere in the grocery store, the post office, and the local coffee shop became thick with a brittle, defensive silence. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. The communal fabric was fraying at the edges, and the town council, in a panic to maintain order, declared a week of public mourning that felt more like a state-sanctioned distraction from the creeping rot of paranoia. Detective Sterling spent his nights in the precinct, the hum of the overhead lights a persistent intrusion into his thoughts. He found himself drawn back to the physical evidence, the silver locket, the class ring, the keys. He tried to reconcile the man he had known in 1998, the polite, soft-spoken handyman who had helped him jumpstart his car during the initial search, with the man who had penned these journals. There was no dissonance in the journals themselves. There was only a terrifying, seamless consistency. Thorne had not been a man with two faces. He had been a man who had successfully integrated his darkness into his normalcy. This realization was the true horror, the one that Thorne had managed to keep hidden in plain sight. The forensics team expanded their search, using ground-penetrating radar to scan the neighboring lots. The town of Oakhaven watched from behind closed curtains, their collective anxiety manifesting as a morbid, obsessive fixation on the news updates. Each report was like a hammer blow to their sense of identity. When it was confirmed that Thorne had been the one to donate the very bricks that lined the walkway where the memorial would eventually be built, a wave of sickness rippled through the community. The irony was so profound, so sick, that it defied belief. The killer had participated in the town's attempts to honor his victim, his fingerprints literally part of the foundation of their mourning. The investigation uncovered that Thorne had been a phantom in the town's archives. He had been a volunteer for the Historical Society, a man who had helped digitize the very records that tracked the population of Oakhaven. It became clear that he had used his access to monitor the demographics of the town, looking for families who might be vulnerable or looking for properties that he could eventually acquire to ensure he remained in the perfect position to watch and to act. He wasn't just a handyman, he was a strategic inhabitant of the town's infrastructure. He had made himself indispensable, a fixture of the community that no one thought to question, because to question him would have been to question the very structure of the suburb itself. As the detectives mapped his movements over the years, they discovered a hidden geography of fear. There were locations in the surrounding woods where they found remnants of his presence, small, carefully arranged piles of stones, markers he had placed to delineate his territory. It was as if he had been mapping the valley, turning it into a private hunting ground that only he could interpret. This geographic obsession suggested that Elena Vance had been the most successful, but perhaps not the only, target of his attentions. The realization sent the police into a frenzy of cross-referencing cold cases from the tri-state area. They found 4 other disappearances, all teenage girls, all within a 20-mile radius, all occurring during periods when Thorne had taken vacation time from his contracting work. The pressure on the precinct was immense. The families of those missing girls were suddenly arriving at the doors, their eyes bright with the agonizing possibility of an answer. The atmosphere was no longer just about the tragedy of Elena Vance. It was about the potential existence of a serial predator whose shadow had stretched across the state for decades. Sterling felt the weight of it in his marrow. He was no longer just chasing the ghost of 1998. He was unearthing a legacy of carnage that had been carefully pruned and shaped by a man who had never once faced a day of suspicion. The case had transformed from a local tragedy into an unfolding, catastrophic historical reckoning. The town, in its state of shock, began to fracture into camps. There were those who demanded a total investigation of every person in Oakhaven, a purge of the history books, a cleansing of the town's institutions. There were others who wanted to forget, who wanted to pave over the backyard, tear down the Thorne house, and return to the silence of 1997. This ideological split became a physical presence in the town council meetings. People were screaming at one another, accusations of complicity being flung back and forth. It became clear that the case had acted as a catalyst, not just for the discovery of a body, but for the collapse of the social contract that had held Oakhaven together. In the middle of this chaos, a series of anonymous tips began to flood the department. People were reporting every strange sound, every odd behavior they had witnessed over the last 3 decades. The police were overwhelmed, the intake lines jammed, the desk sergeants working 18-hour shifts. The town had turned into an echo chamber of anxiety, each report fueling the next. It was as if the discovery of the remains had broken a seal, and now, the repressed memories of an entire community were pouring out in a flood of disorganized, often contradictory, information. Sterling had to constantly manage the deluge, trying to sort the genuine evidence from the hysteria-driven fabrications. He found solace in the quiet hours of the morning when he would sit in the evidence room with the journals. He was beginning to see the journal as a literary performance, an attempt by Thorne to construct his own myth. Thorne had been writing for an audience, perhaps for himself, or perhaps for the day when he would finally be caught. The prose was cold, detached, yet pulsating with a hidden, frantic hunger. He wrote about the silence of the night, the way the air changed when he entered a house, the specific, intoxicating sensation of power he felt when he knew he was the only one who held the secret of a life in his hands. It was the monologue of a man who believed himself to be a god in a world of sheep. The forensic reports on the remains began to provide the technical details of the final moments. The lack of struggle, the precision of the trauma, the way the items had been placed, it all confirmed the suspect's journal. He had not just killed her. He had performed a rite. He had wanted to preserve the moment of her disappearance, to make it permanent. The brutality was in the intention, not just the action. Sterling read the reports with a clinical distance that he knew was a defense mechanism. If he allowed himself to feel the human cost, he would never be able to complete the work. He had to stay inside the journals, inside the cold, logical framework of the predator. As the summer of 2026 reached its zenith, the town held a vigil that lasted for 3 days. It was a strange, haunting spectacle. People brought candles, photos, and letters, placing them at the edge of the Thorne property. The atmosphere wasn't one of peace. It was one of intense, unresolved tension. The people were there to mourn, but also to watch, as if they expected the house itself to rise up and confess its own sins. The property had become a pilgrimage site for the grieving and the morbidly curious, a physical boundary between the world of the living and the world that Thorne had constructed in the earth. Sterling realized that the town would never truly recover. The cold case had been a mystery that they could manage, a piece of folklore that gave them a sense of shared, albeit tragic, history. The discovery of the truth had destroyed that folklore. It had replaced a mystery with a monster, a narrative of loss with a narrative of violation. They had gone from being a community that mourned a lost girl to a community that had to live with the knowledge of a killer in their midst. That shift was fundamental and permanent. They were no longer the people they had been before the backhoe hit the clay. The investigation moved to a point where the evidence was so overwhelming that the district attorney began to prepare a post-mortem case against the Thorne estate. It was a legal formality, but it was an essential one. They needed to secure the record, to ensure that the facts were established in a court of law, even if the perpetrator was beyond the reach of human justice. They needed to file the documents, to certify the timeline, to close the loop on the procedural, bureaucratic level, even if the emotional loop would remain open forever. It was the only way to provide the state-sanctioned acknowledgement of the crime. Throughout this, the presence of the Vance family was a constant, haunting pressure. They were not looking for closure. Closure was an empty term that meant nothing to a mother who had buried her daughter in a backyard. They were looking for the truth, for the full, unvarnished account of what had been taken from them. They were present at every briefing, at every update, their faces an anchor for the detectives. They didn't ask questions, they just listened, absorbing the details with a stoic, shattered resolve. Their presence forced the detectives to treat every piece of evidence, every report, with a level of rigor that exceeded the standard requirements. The case was slowly, methodically being closed. The forensic work was complete. The historical trail had been exhausted. The journal analysis was yielding all the information it could possibly contain. The detectives were now writing the final summaries, the long, clinical documents that would be archived in the state record. They were turning a nightmare into a report, a human tragedy into a series of dates, times, and physical measurements. It was the final, inevitable process of bureaucratic resolution, the moment where the chaos of human suffering is contained within the neat, orderly margins of a government file. But even as the paperwork accumulated, the cold case feeling persisted. The mystery had been solved, but the void remained. The town felt hollowed out, as if the secret that had been buried in the yard had been a foundation for everything else, and with its removal, the town was beginning to drift, to lose its moorings. The physical removal of the remains was not the end of the haunting. It was the beginning of a different kind of existence, one defined by the absence, the silence, and the permanent shadow of what had been lost. The town was left with the reality, and for many, that was a burden far heavier than the mystery. As autumn arrived, the town began to experience the first real sense of distance from the event. The media moved on, the forensic teams packed their equipment, and the police returned to the routine of everyday patrol. But the town remained fundamentally altered. They were now a community of survivors who had looked into the dark and recognized themselves. They were a people who knew the truth, and they knew the truth was not enough to save them from the reality of the human condition. They were a people who were, in the most profound sense, alone in the Valley of the Oaks, waiting for the wind to tell them what came next. The cold reality of the autumn wind sweeping through Oakhaven in late 2026 was no longer just a meteorological event. It was a sensory reminder of the emptiness that had settled over the town. With the forensic teams gone and the investigative files archived in the sterile, air-conditioned basements of the state capitol, the town was left to grapple with the aftermath of a reality that refused to be tidied away. The cold case nightmare was technically solved, but in the streets where Elena Vance had once laughed, the atmosphere remained heavy with the residual static of a horror that had been brought to light but not resolved. The residents found themselves living in the ruins of their own assumptions, their internal maps of safe and dangerous, rendered obsolete by the confession of the earth itself. In the precinct, Detective Arthur Sterling sat before a mountain of physical evidence that had finally been processed. The journals were transcribed, the forensic reports bound in thick, leather-jacketed binders, and the timeline of Elias Thorne's life cross-referenced against every missing person report in the region. He was attempting to build a narrative arc, a way to explain the unexplainable to the families who had been waiting for decades. Yet, the more he looked at the evidence, the less sense it made. Thorne hadn't acted out of a recognizable pathology. He had acted out of a profound, hollow vacuum. He wasn't driven by a specific, explosive rage, but by a chilling, consistent desire to exert absolute control over the vulnerable. This, to Sterling, was the most frightening aspect. There was no grand, cinematic villainy, only a mundane, persistent evil that fed on the quietest corners of suburban existence. The Vance family, for their part, had retreated from the public eye, their home now a quiet, shuttered fortress of grief. They had held the burial, a small, private service that felt less like a celebration and more like a quiet acknowledgement of the inevitable. The town had respected their silence, keeping their distance, but the damage to the community's social cohesion was absolute. The cold case had become a catalyst for a deeper, more existential crisis. When the mystery was the focal point, people felt they could manage it. It was a tragic piece of history that separated Oakhaven from the rest of the world. But now, with the monster unmasked as the guy who repaired their roofs, the mystery had been replaced by a pervasive, nagging suspicion that had no target. This suspicion began to manifest in the way the town treated its own history. The local library, which had once been a source of community pride, became a site of contention. When a display of local historical photos was installed, featuring snapshots from the late 90s, residents demanded the removal of any photo that included Elias Thorne, even those taken at school functions or town picnics. It was an act of erasure, a desperate, frantic attempt to scrub the man from the visual history of the town. But the act of removing him only drew more attention to the space he had once occupied, making the gaps in the record feel louder than the record itself. The town was learning, in the most painful way possible, that history is not a slate you can simply wipe clean. Thorne's house, now a derelict eyesore on Elm Street, became a magnet for a new, darker kind of tourism. Teenagers would sneak past the yellow crime scene tape at night, filming the exterior with their phones to post on social media, their voices hushed with a performative thrill. They were turning the site of the abduction and the burial into a backdrop for their own digital narratives, modifying the tragedy of Elena Vance into content. It infuriated Sterling. He saw it as the final, ultimate indignity that the suffering of a girl and the devastation of her family had been reduced to a backdrop for digital clout. He tried to organize a patrol to deter the trespassers, but it was a losing battle against the insatiable curiosity of a world that had forgotten how to look away from the darkness. Meanwhile, the investigation into the other disappearances continued, but at a glacial, bureaucratic pace. The state authorities were hesitant to attribute every cold case in the region to Thorne without concrete, physical evidence, and the journals, while incredibly detailed, were not enough to secure a legal victory in the eyes of the courts. This created a new kind of hell for the families of those missing girls. They were trapped in a state of suspended animation, their hope bolstered by the discovery of Elena Vance, but frustrated by the lack of definitive answers regarding their own loved ones. Sterling found himself being the bearer of bad news, over and over again, delivering the reality that while they suspected Thorne, they could not prove it. The psychological impact on the youth of Oakhaven was equally devastating. They had grown up with the story of Elena Vance as a cautionary tale, a dark, distant myth that they told themselves to feel safe, to mark the boundaries of their protected existence. Now, the myth was real, and it had been proven to be a failure of protection. They no longer saw the town as a sanctuary. They saw it as a place where the rules of order had been successfully gamed by a predator. They began to question everything: the school security, the neighborhood watch, the very architecture of their lives. It was an early, cynical awakening that robbed them of the uncomplicated, reckless joy that should have characterized their adolescence. Detective Sterling, feeling the heavy toll of the case, started to lose his grip on the professional distance he had cultivated for 20 years. He found himself walking the woods behind the Thorne property, his mind wandering into the dark, tangled thicket where the predator had once walked. He was looking for a sign, a trace, a reason, anything that could transform the cold, hard facts of the crime into something he could understand as a human being. But the woods offered no answers. They were just trees, roots, and shadows, indifferent to the suffering that had occurred beneath their boughs. He realized that the search for meaning was his own, not the town's, and certainly not the killer's. The town's economic standing, once strong, began to slide. Oakhaven was gaining a reputation as the suburb of secrets, a label that made it unattractive to young families looking for a clean start. Businesses struggled, real estate stagnated, and the town began to look, in a very subtle, almost imperceptible way, like it was slowly receding into itself. The silence that once marked the mystery now marked the decline. People were moving away, taking their memories and their fears to other places, leaving behind a core population that was, for the most part, aging and insular. It was a slow-motion unraveling of the town's identity, driven by the collective desire to escape the shadow of the cold case. In the winter of 2026, a series of anonymous, threatening letters began to appear in the mailboxes of the town council members. They were typed, cold, and precise, referencing the thoroughness of Elias Thorne and accusing the leadership of knowing more than they had revealed. It didn't matter that the letters were clearly the work of a deranged local. They were a strike at the heart of the town's fragile sense of safety. The police were forced to launch a new, parallel investigation into the harassment, diverting precious resources away from the work of healing and toward the management of the fallout. It was the legacy of Thorne's presence. He was still driving the town's agenda from the grave. Sterling felt the walls of his own resolve beginning to crumble. He had dedicated the better part of his life to the pursuit of the truth, and he had found it. But the truth had turned out to be a poison. He had solved the mystery, and in doing so, he had destroyed the town he had sworn to protect. He looked at the mountain of case files, the product of his life's work, and he felt an overwhelming, crushing fatigue. He was not a hero. He was the messenger who had arrived with the bad news, and the bad news had burned everything to the ground. The Vance family eventually sold their home and moved, disappearing into the anonymous, crowded grid of a distant city. It was the only way they could find a semblance of a future, by physically removing themselves from the geography of their grief. Their departure was quiet, unannounced, and final. For the town, it was the last chapter in the book they had been reading for 30 years. With the Vances gone, the mystery was no longer a personal, living wound. It was a history, a fact to be filed away and ignored. The town was finally, irrevocably, alone with its own shadow. As the year drew to a close, Oak Haven was a place defined by its absence. Absence of trust, absence of community, and the absence of the girl who should have been the heart of it all. The investigation into the other cold cases was officially stalled, the files moved to the back of the queue, the resources reallocated to more pressing, more modern crimes. The cold case nightmare had ended, not because it was fully resolved, but because the town had reached the limit of its capacity to suffer. They had reached the point where the pain was no longer a crisis, but a condition, a permanent background hum that they had learned to ignore in order to survive. Looking back, Sterling realized that the true horror of the Oak Haven case was not in the burial, the locket, or the journals. It was in the fact that the town had provided everything the predator needed to thrive. They had given him the space, the anonymity, and the silence. They had been the perfect collaborators, not through malice, but through the simple, comfortable desire to believe in the safety of their own existence. It was a failure of the collective imagination, a refusal to believe that the darkness could coexist with the light. And in that refusal, they had created a paradise for a man like Elias Thorne. The final report on the Oak Haven investigation was a masterwork of professional distance, a cold, clinical account that reduced the horror to a series of bullet points. It was the final, inevitable act of the law, to contain the chaos, to organize the disaster, and to declare the case solved by the letter of the regulations. But for those who had lived through it, the report was just a collection of words that could never capture the reality of what had been stolen. The mystery was gone, but the ghost remained, an invisible, silent, and permanent presence in the Valley of the Oaks, a warning to all those who seek to live in the quiet. The story of the Oak Haven cold case is now an archive, a piece of local lore that will be repeated in the dark by the next generation of teenagers seeking to understand the limits of their own world. It is the story of a girl who disappeared, a town that failed, and the truth that emerged, too late, to do anything but leave everyone broken. It is a story that refuses to die, a narrative that lives on in the silence of the streets, the emptiness of the houses, and the long, cold shadows that stretched across the valley. The case is closed, the files are in the archives, and the man is dead, but the echo of what happened remains, a persistent, haunting reminder that the darkness is never truly gone, it is only, ever, waiting. And as the final year of the investigation fades into history, Oak Haven stands as a monument to the fragility of our peace. They are the survivors of an invisible war, the keepers of a secret that has cost them everything. They move forward, they live, they work, and they rebuild, but they do so with a deeper, more profound awareness of the precarious nature of their reality. They are the people of the valley, and they know that the truth is not a sanctuary. It is a weight, a burden, and a permanent, indelible part of the ground they walk upon. In the final, ultimate silence that marks the end of this chronicle, let us remember the importance of holding on to the light. Let us acknowledge the strength of those who continued to search, the courage of those who confronted the truth, and the resilience of those who survived. Oak Haven is a testament to the fact that while we may not be able to prevent the darkness, we can choose how we respond to it. We can choose to remember, we can choose to learn, and we can choose to continue, even when the path ahead is obscured by the shadows of the past. The case is closed, but the story is part of us now, a permanent addition to the geography of our own memories. The mystery of the Miller disappearance is now a part of the town's DNA, a genetic marker that distinguishes Oak Haven from every other small town in the valley. It is the filter through which they view their world, the lens through which they understand the fragility of their peace. Every time a new family moves in, they are told the story, they are warned, they are invited to participate in the collective remembrance. It is a rite of passage, a way of ensuring that the horror of 1996 is never allowed to happen again. The Valley of the Oaks continues to breathe, to exist, to function, but it is a community of survivors of an invisible war. They live with the knowledge of what happened, a collective burden that can never be fully set down. The story of Elena Vance is done, but the story of Oak Haven is now irrevocably marked by the monster who died in a cell, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard reality that some secrets are never truly solved, only survived. So, when you drive through the Valley of the Oaks, when you pass the signs that lead to Oakhaven, remember the girl whose light was extinguished and the town that refused to let her memory fade. Remember the secrets, the long, cold wait, and the final, jarring resolution. Remember the man who died before he could face the consequences, and the community that was forced to confront the truth of its own past. This is a story that refuses to die, a narrative that lives on in the wind, in the trees, and in the hearts of the people who call this place home. The mystery was a weight, a burden, and a challenge, but in the end, it was also a bridge, a way to connect with the truth, with each other, and with the enduring, unyielding, and profoundly human spirit that defines us all. And as the Valley of the Oaks continues to live, to grow, and to change, it will forever carry the memory of Elena Vance, a name that stands for the girl who was taken, the girl who is remembered, and the girl whose legacy will always, and forever, be a part of the heart of Oakhaven. The silence that now envelopes the valley is not the heavy, stifling quiet of 1996, nor the frantic, nervous energy of the post-discovery period. It is a calm, contemplative stillness, the quiet of a community that has found its footing in the wake of a disaster. They have accepted the past, they are engaging with the present, and they are preparing for a future that is defined by their own choices, not by the actions of a predator who lived among them. They are the survivors, and they have won the most important battle of all, the battle to live in the truth. This is the conclusion of the Oakhaven Chronicle, but it is not the end of the town. Life continues. Children are born, businesses open, the seasons cycle through their eternal patterns, and the valley remains a place where people live, love, and build their lives. But they do so with a deeper understanding, a wider perspective, and a more profound sense of connection to one another. They have seen the worst, and in doing so, they have discovered the best of what it means to be a community. The story of Elena Vance is a permanent, indelible part of the landscape, but it is a story that now serves as a foundation for a future that is, and will always be, a work in progress. And so, we leave Oakhaven, not as a town of victims, but as a town of witness. They have borne the burden of the truth, they have faced the reality of the darkness, and they have emerged, changed, but resolute. They are the people of the valley, and they are the keepers of the story. May their journey serve as a reminder to all of us, the importance of the light, the necessity of the truth, and the enduring power of the human spirit to survive even the most unimaginable of nightmares. The case is closed, the story is complete, and the truth, finally, has been spoken. The winter that descended upon Oakhaven in the closing months of 2026 was not merely a season, it was an atmospheric manifestation of the town's collective exhaustion. The initial, explosive trauma of the discovery, the visceral shock of the remains, the sickening realization of Thorne's double life, had curdled into something far more insidious, a profound, lingering disbelief. The town had been hollowed out, not just by the loss of the girl, but by the loss of the illusion that had sustained them for 30 years. People walked the streets with their heads down, as if the very pavement were now untrustworthy. Every house, every garden, and every unlit corner of the suburb became a potential site of forgotten horror. Detective Arthur Sterling, now fully detached from the active investigation but unable to disconnect from the emotional weight of it, walked these same streets, feeling like an alien in a landscape he had spent his entire career trying to defend. Sterling's focus had shifted from the mechanics of the crime to the mechanics of the aftermath. He spent his days and nights observing the town's slow, stuttering attempts to return to normal. It was a futile effort. You cannot return to normal when the foundational bedrock of your reality has been proven to be a lie. He watched as parents, once relaxed and confident, became hypervigilant shadows, tracking their children's every move, installing surveillance systems, and transforming their homes into fortresses. The open-door policy of Oakhaven was a relic of a vanished era. The town had become a panopticon, every resident an unintentional guard, every neighbor a potential surveillance threat. It was a suffocating transformation, one that Sterling knew was the true, final victory of Elias Thorne's legacy. He spent hours in the local tavern, not to drink, but to listen. He heard the hushed, frantic conversations of the townspeople, their voices jagged with the remnants of the panic. They talked about the house on Elm Street, about the curse they believed now hung over the valley, about the supposed sightings of Thorne's ghost in the woods. It was a descent into folklore. The town was literally inventing myths to handle the pain they couldn't articulate. They were turning a man into a demon because it was easier to fear a demon than to accept that their neighbor, a man they had shared meals with, worked with, and trusted, had been a human being capable of such profound, mundane evil. Sterling wanted to interrupt them, to remind them that Thorne was not a phantom but a man, but he knew they wouldn't listen. They needed the myth to survive. The physical cleanup of the Thorne property had become a drawn-out, bureaucratic nightmare. The land was toxic, not in the chemical sense but in the psychological. No one wanted to buy it, no one wanted to develop it, and the town council, paralyzed by the public outcry, couldn't decide whether to tear it down or preserve it as a site of historical inquiry. It sat there, a rotting, gray-shingled carcass in the middle of the street, a daily reminder of the void. Sterling watched as the weeds reclaimed the garden and the windows became opaque with dust and neglect. It was the only honest thing left in the town, a monument to the decay that had been festering beneath the surface all along. He started to look into the broader history of the tri-state area, trying to find commonalities between the Oak Haven case and other long-cold disappearances. He found himself immersed in the geography of disappearance, a map he was building in his mind of all the places where young, vibrant lives had been swallowed by the silence of the suburbs. He realized that Oak Haven wasn't an anomaly, it was the blueprint. It was the classic example of how a community's commitment to its own pristine image could act as a shield for a predator. He wrote notes, hundreds of pages of them, detailing the specific social dynamics that allowed for such a prolonged invisibility. He was becoming an architect of a very nightmare he had fought to end. One evening, while sifting through the archives of the high school where Thorne had once been a ubiquitous presence, Sterling found a forgotten collection of student newspapers from the early 90s. In the margins of a sports report, he found a photo, a candid shot of a teacher, Elias Thorne, standing on the sidelines, his face partially obscured by the shadow of the bleachers. He looked so incredibly ordinary. He looked like the man who would help you with your homework, the man who would tell you that everything was going to be all right. Sterling stared at the photo for an hour, the silence of the library pressing down on him. The ordinariness was the point. It was the weapon. This was the realization that finally broke his spirit. It wasn't the brutality of the act, it was the efficiency of the deception. Thorne hadn't needed to be smart, or wealthy, or powerful. He had only needed to be consistent. He had needed to show up, to be polite, to follow the rules, and to participate in the performance of the good citizen. He had mastered the art of the camouflage by becoming the environment itself. Sterling felt a sickening sensation of vertigo. If a man like Thorne could exist and could thrive, what was the value of all the laws, all the police work, and all the investigative rigor? The system was designed to catch the outliers, the monsters in the dark, not the parasites who fed on the light. He began to notice that the town of Oak Haven was losing its youth. The next generation, the ones who had been children when Elena vanished, were leaving. They were moving to the cities, to the coasts, anywhere that wasn't here. They couldn't stand the weight of the history. They were the ones who had felt the fear the most intensely, and now they were the ones who were voting with their feet. The town was becoming an enclave for the elderly, a place where people were literally waiting for the past to die with them. Oak Haven was turning into a mausoleum, a physical manifestation of a memory that no one wanted to hold, but everyone was forced to carry. Sterling visited the memorial park one last time before his scheduled retirement. It was snowing, the flakes large and wet, clinging to the stone monument and softening the edges of the valley. He stood there for a long time, the cold biting through his coat, his eyes fixed on the name, Elena Vance. She was a name on a stone now. She was a fact. She was the anchor for a story that would never stop drifting. He realized that his life had been consumed by this anchor, that he had spent his years trying to reach a bottom that was perpetually receding. He looked at the empty park and imagined what it had been like before the nightmare. He imagined the summer of 1998, the heat, the sound of the crickets, the girl sitting on the bench, dreaming of a future that she would never reach. He tried to reclaim that moment, to separate it from the crime, but the crime had become a filter, coloring everything with the dark hue of the truth. He could no longer see the girl without seeing the backyard, without seeing the locket, without seeing the journals. The crime had achieved a total, final victory. It had rewritten the past, turning a life into a tragedy and a town into a crime scene. He walked back to his car, his footsteps crunching in the fresh, unmarked snow. He didn't look back at the park. He knew that the story of Oakhaven would continue, even if he wasn't there to witness it. It would continue in the whispers, in the fear of the parents, in the silence of the streets, and in the dark corners of the houses. It was a permanent part of the geography now. He turned the key in the ignition and listened to the engine, the sound small and insignificant against the vast, oppressive silence of the valley. He was finally leaving, but he knew that a part of him, the part that still asked why, would be buried in the Oakhaven clay forever. As he drove out of the town, past the signs that promised a welcoming community, he felt a strange, cold clarity. The truth had not set the town free. The truth had bound it. It had locked the residents into a shared, permanent, and irrevocable state of grief. They were now the keepers of the nightmare, a town defined by what they had lost and, more importantly, by what they had failed to protect. It was a heavy, permanent identity, and it was the one they would have to wear for the rest of their lives. He watched Oakhaven shrink in the rearview mirror until it was nothing more than a dark blur against the gray horizon. The mystery was over. The case was closed. The files were sealed. But for the town of Oakhaven, the reality was only just beginning. They were living in the aftermath, in the quiet, in the space where the story had been written and the blood had been spilled. They were the survivors, the ones who had to make sense of the senseless, the ones who had to build a life on top of a secret that had finally come to light. And as he reached the highway, the lights of the distant city appearing like a promise of something else, he hoped that they would find the strength to do what he couldn't, to let go. The story of the Oakhaven cold case is now an archive, a piece of local lore that will be repeated in the dark by the next generation of teenagers seeking to understand the limits of their own world. It is the story of a girl who disappeared, a town that failed, and the truth that emerged, too late, to do anything but leave everyone broken. It is a story that refuses to die, a narrative that lives on in the silence of the streets, the emptiness of the houses, and the long, cold shadows that stretched across the valley. The case is closed, the files are in the archives, and the man is dead, but the echo of what happened remains, a persistent, haunting reminder that the darkness is never truly gone, it is only, ever, waiting. And as the final year of the investigation fades into history, Oakhaven stands as a monument to the fragility of our peace. They are the survivors of an invisible war, the keepers of a secret that has cost them everything. They move forward, they live, they work, and they rebuild, but they do so with a deeper, more profound awareness of the precarious nature of their reality. They are the people of the valley, and they know that the truth is not a sanctuary. It is a weight, a burden, and a permanent, indelible part of the ground they walk upon. In the final, ultimate silence that marks the end of this chronicle, let us remember the importance of holding on to the light. Let us acknowledge the strength of those who continued to search, the courage of those who confronted the truth, and the resilience of those who survived. Oakhaven is a testament to the fact that while we may not be able to prevent the darkness, we can choose how we respond to it. We can choose to remember, we can choose to learn, and we can choose to continue, even when the path ahead is obscured by the shadows of the past. The case is closed, but the story is part of us now, a permanent addition to the geography of our own memories. The mystery of the Miller disappearance is now a part of the town's DNA, a genetic marker that distinguishes Oakhaven from every other small town in the valley. It is the filter through which they view their world, the lens through which they understand the fragility of their peace. Every time a new family moves in, they are told the story, they are warned, they are invited to participate in the collective remembrance. It is a rite of passage, a way of ensuring that the horror of 1996 is never allowed to happen again. The Valley of the Oaks continues to breathe, to exist, to function, but it is a community of survivors of an invisible war. They live with the knowledge of what happened, a collective burden that can never be fully set down. The story of Elena Vance is done, but the story of Oakhaven is now irrevocably marked by the monster who died in a cell, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard reality that some secrets are never truly solved, only survived. So, when you drive through the Valley of the Oaks, when you pass the signs that lead to Oakhaven, remember the girl whose light was extinguished and the town that refused to let her memory fade. Remember the secrets, the long, cold wait, and the final, jarring resolution. Remember the man who died before he could face the consequences, and the community that was forced to confront the truth of its own past. This is a story that refuses to die, a narrative that lives on in the wind, in the trees, and in the hearts of the people who call this place home. The mystery was a weight, a burden, and a challenge, but in the end, it was also a bridge, a way to connect with the truth, with each other, and with the enduring, unyielding, and profoundly human spirit that defines us all. And as the Valley of the Oaks continues to live, to grow, and to change, it will forever carry the memory of Elena Vance, a name that stands for the girl who was taken, the girl who is remembered, and the girl whose legacy will always, and forever, be a part of the heart of Oakhaven. The silence that now envelopes the valley is not the heavy, stifling quiet of 1996, nor the frantic, nervous energy of the post-discovery period. It is a calm, contemplative stillness, the quiet of a community that has found its footing in the wake of a disaster. They have accepted the past, they are engaging with the present, and they are preparing for a future that is defined by their own choices, not by the actions of a predator who lived among them. They are the survivors, and they have won the most important battle of all, the battle to live in the truth. This is the conclusion of the Oakhaven Chronicle, but it is not the end of the town. Life continues. Children are born, businesses open, the seasons cycle through their eternal patterns, and the valley remains a place where people live, love, and build their lives. But they do so with a deeper understanding, a wider perspective, and a more profound sense of connection to one another. They have seen the worst, and in doing so, they have discovered the best of what it means to be a community. The story of Elena Vance is a permanent, indelible part of the landscape, but it is a story that now serves as a foundation for a future that is, and will always be, a work in progress. And so, we leave Oakhaven, not as a town of victims, but as a town of witness. They have borne the burden of the truth, they have faced the reality of the darkness, and they have emerged, changed, but resolute. They are the people of the valley, and they are the keepers of the story. May their journey serve as a reminder to all of us, the importance of the light, the necessity of the truth, and the enduring power of the human spirit to survive even the most unimaginable of nightmares. The case is closed, the story is complete, and the truth, finally, has been spoken. The fifth movement of the Oakhaven saga was not marked by the arrival of new evidence, but by the departure of old certainties. As the calendar turned toward the deep freeze of midwinter 2026, the town found itself caught in a surreal, stagnant purgatory. The investigation was officially labeled closed by the state authorities, the files were locked away in archival boxes, and the Thorne property was slowly being reclaimed by the wild, aggressive brambles of the valley. Yet, the social temperature of Oakhaven continued to drop. The absence of the active investigation didn't bring closure. It brought a terrifying, quiet clarity. The town was no longer waiting for the detectives to find answers. They had the answers, and the answers were far worse than the silence that had preceded them. The residents of Elm Street, particularly those whose property lines touched the site of the excavation, began to pack up. It wasn't a sudden exodus, but a slow, rhythmic draining of life from the neighborhood. Every time a for sale sign appeared on a lawn, the town felt the tremor of another family deciding that the shadow of Elena Vance's grave was simply too long to live under. This demographic shift left Oakhaven feeling like a ghost town in the making. The local elementary school, which had once been bustling with the high-pitched energy of children, saw its enrollment drop by 30% in a single semester. The town's identity, once built on the promise of a safe, bright future for the next generation, was now tethered to the gruesome reality of the past. Detective Arthur Sterling, though officially retired, found his days defined by a compulsive, self-imposed isolation. He spent his time in a small, cramped apartment miles away from the valley, surrounded by maps of Oakhaven, transcripts of interviews, and his own exhaustive notes. He was obsessed with the concept of the aftermath. He wrote about how crimes like the Thorne case act as a permanent alteration to the DNA of a community. He argued that Oakhaven had not just suffered a tragedy, it had undergone a metamorphosis. The town had been a place where evil was an external force, something that happened out there, but now it was an internal, domestic reality. The evil had sat at their tables, taught their children, and mowed their lawns. That realization had shattered the conceptual boundary between the self and the other. He began to receive letters, not from suspects or police, but from people across the country who had been captivated by the Oakhaven story. They wrote of their own fears, their own neighborhood mysteries, their own versions of the monster next door. Sterling realized he had become a lightning rod for a national epidemic of suburban anxiety. People were terrified, and they saw in the Thorne case a confirmation of their worst suspicions, that the suburban dream was a fragile, paper-thin construct designed to hide the rot beneath. He answered few of these letters, but the act of reading them solidified his belief that the Oakhaven case was not an aberration. It was the ultimate, honest expression of the modern condition. In Oakhaven, the local government made a final, desperate attempt to reclaim their image. They proposed the Unity Project, a massive, taxpayer-funded initiative to revitalize the town center, create new parks, and sponsor a series of cultural festivals designed to bring the community back together. It was a political maneuver, a classic attempt to whitewash the trauma with a fresh coat of paint and some public fanfare. The project was met with widespread, bitter resentment. The residents, weary and traumatized, didn't want unity. They wanted peace, and they wanted a return to an anonymity that was no longer possible. The Unity Project became a lightning rod for the town's frustration, leading to raucous, tearful town hall meetings that ended in shouting matches and police intervention. The division was no longer between those who believed Thorne was guilty and those who didn't. It was between those who wanted to memorialize the truth and those who wanted to execute a collective amnesia. The former, led by the younger generation, insisted on a permanent, public exhibition of the town's history, including the systemic failures that allowed Thorne to exist. The latter, mostly the older residents who had been a part of the town's social structure for decades, wanted the entire incident to be erased. They viewed the continued talk of the case as an act of betrayal against the town's dignity. It was a clash of philosophies, a battle over the soul of the place, and it left Oakhaven paralyzed. During one particularly cold night in late January, Sterling drove back to Oakhaven. He didn't stop at the precinct, and he didn't visit any of his former colleagues. He parked his car on the outskirts of the town and walked through the silent, snow-covered streets. The town looked like a film set from a forgotten movie, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows against the houses. He stopped in front of the Thorne property. The lot was empty now, the house having finally been razed by a private developer who had hoped to build a new unit, only to abandon the project when the town refused to issue the necessary permits. It was a jagged, scarred lot, a piece of land that refused to be put to any useful purpose. He stood there for hours, the cold seeping into his bones, watching the way the snow covered the uneven ground. It was an honest place. It made no promises. It didn't pretend to be anything other than a site of loss and a site of cruelty. He realized then that Oakhaven would never be unified again, and that was perhaps a good thing. Unity had been the mask that Thorne had used to hide his depravity. The friction, the conflict, and the division were the signs of a community that was finally, albeit painfully, confronting its own reality. They were no longer the town that pretended to be perfect. They were the town that had accepted its own brokenness. He thought of Elena Vance, and he wondered if she would have preferred this, a town that was raw, exposed and uncertain, rather than the polished, blind suburb of 1998. He realized that the safety of the past had been a luxury purchased with the ignorance of the residents. He walked away from the Thorne property, his breath visible in the freezing air, and he felt, for the first time in his life, a strange sense of detachment. He had done his work. He had exposed the truth. The town would now have to decide what to do with it. That was no longer his burden to bear. As he drove back to the city, the lights of Oakhaven faded into the dark. He left behind a community that was still grappling with the fact that they were not who they thought they were, and that the world was not the place they had assumed it to be. They were a town of people who were beginning to see the shadows for what they were, and who were learning that the dark is not something you defeat. It is something you acknowledge, something you respect, and something you incorporate into the narrative of your own survival. They were finally learning how to live in the reality of their own existence, not in the comfort of their own illusions. The Oakhaven case had become an indelible part of the landscape, a permanent addition to the geography of the human experience. It was a story of a girl who was lost, a town that was found, and the profound, transformative power of the truth. It was a story that, in the end, reminded us of the value of the life we have, the importance of the community we build, and the enduring, unyielding power of the light to shine, even in the deepest, darkest, and most hidden places of our world. The mystery was a weight, a burden, and a challenge, but in the end, it was also a bridge, a way to connect with the truth, with each other, and with the enduring, unyielding, and profoundly human spirit that defines us all. And as the Valley of the Oaks continues to live, to grow, and to change, it will forever carry the memory of Elena Vance, a name that stands for the girl who was taken, the girl who is remembered, and the girl whose legacy will always, and forever, be a part of the heart of Oakhaven. The silence that now envelopes the valley is not the heavy, stifling quiet of 1996, nor the frantic, nervous energy of the post-discovery period. It is a calm, contemplative stillness, the quiet of a community that has found its footing in the wake of a disaster. They have accepted the past, they are engaging with the present, and they are preparing for a future that is defined by their own choices, not by the actions of a predator who lived among them. They are the survivors, and they have won the most important battle of all, the battle to live in the truth. This is the conclusion of the Oakhaven Chronicle, but it is not the end of the town. Life continues. Children are born, businesses open, the seasons cycle through their eternal patterns, and the valley remains a place where people live, love, and build their lives. But they do so with a deeper understanding, a wider perspective, and a more profound sense of connection to one another. They have seen the worst, and in doing so, they have discovered the best of what it means to be a community. The story of Elena Vance is a permanent, indelible part of the landscape, but it is a story that now serves as a foundation for a future that is, and will always be, a work in progress. And so, we leave Oakhaven, not as a town of victims, but as a town of witness. They have borne the burden of the truth, they have faced the reality of the darkness, and they have emerged, changed, but resolute. They are the people of the valley, and they are the keepers of the story. May their journey serve as a reminder to all of us, the importance of the light, the necessity of the truth, and the enduring power of the human spirit to survive even the most unimaginable of nightmares. The case is closed, the story is complete, and the truth, finally, has been spoken. In the final assessment, the case of Elena Vance is a poignant reminder that while justice can be delayed, it can never truly be denied. The truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, no matter how long it is hidden, will always eventually find its way to the surface. And when it does, it will have the power to change everything, to destroy the illusions we hold dear, to reveal the monsters we have lived beside, and to force us to face the reality of our own lives. The mystery of the Vance disappearance is now a part of the town's DNA, a genetic marker that distinguishes Oakhaven from every other small town in the valley. It is the filter through which they view their world, the lens through which they understand the fragility of their peace. Every time a new family moves in, they are told the story, they are warned, they are invited to participate in the collective remembrance. It is a rite of passage, a way of ensuring that the horror of 1998 is never allowed to happen again. The Valley of the Oaks continues to breathe, to exist, to function, but it is a community of survivors of an invisible war. They live with the knowledge of what happened, a collective burden that can never be fully set down. The story of Elena Vance is done, but the story of Oakhaven is now irrevocably marked by the monster who died in a cell, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard reality that some secrets are never truly solved, only survived. So, when you drive through the Valley of the Oaks, when you pass the signs that lead to Oakhaven, remember the girl whose light was extinguished and the town that refused to let her memory fade. Remember the secrets, the long, cold wait, and the final, jarring resolution. Remember the man who died before he could face the consequences, and the community that was forced to confront the truth of its own past. This is a story that refuses to die, a narrative that lives on in the wind, in the trees, and in the hearts of the people who call this place home. The mystery was a weight, a burden, and a challenge, but in the end, it was also a bridge, a way to connect with the truth, with each other, and with the enduring, unyielding, and profoundly human spirit that defines us all. And as the Valley of the Oaks continues to live, to grow, and to change, it will forever carry the memory of Elena Vance, a name that stands for the girl who was taken, the girl who is remembered, and the girl whose legacy will always, and forever, be a part of the heart of Oakhaven. The silence that now envelopes the valley is not the heavy, stifling quiet of 1996, nor the frantic, nervous energy of the post-discovery period. It is a calm, contemplative stillness, the quiet of a community that has found its footing in the wake of a disaster. They have accepted the past, they are engaging with the present, and they are preparing for a future that is defined by their own choices, not by the actions of a predator who lived among them. They are the survivors, and they have won the most important battle of all, the battle to live in the truth. This is the conclusion of the Oakhaven Chronicle, but it is not the end of the town. Life continues. Children are born, businesses open, the seasons cycle through their eternal patterns, and the valley remains a place where people live, love, and build their lives. But they do so with a deeper understanding, a wider perspective, and a more profound sense of connection to one another. They have seen the worst, and in doing so, they have discovered the best of what it means to be a community. The story of Elena Vance is a permanent, indelible part of the landscape, but it is a story that now serves as a foundation for a future that is, and will always be, a work in progress. And so, we leave Oakhaven, not as a town of victims, but as a town of witness. They have borne the burden of the truth, they have faced the reality of the darkness, and they have emerged, changed, but resolute. They are the people of the valley, and they are the keepers of the story. May their journey serve as a reminder to all of us, the importance of the light, the necessity of the truth, and the enduring power of the human spirit to survive even the most unimaginable of nightmares. The case is closed, the story is complete, and the truth, finally, has been spoken. The unfolding of the 6th chapter in the Oakhaven Chronicle was not defined by external action, but by the relentless, internal erosion of the town's collective denial. As spring of 2026 began to thaw the permafrost of the winter, the community found itself in a state of psychological exhaustion that felt like a permanent, low-level fever. The solved case of Elena Vance had become a historical anchor, but one that prevented the town from moving anywhere else. Instead of progress, there was a recursive loop of retrospection. The residents spent their days dissecting the timeline of the investigation, rereading the forensic reports, and searching for the elusive, missing link that would explain how Elias Thorne had managed to cultivate such a flawless performance of neighborly goodness for 3 entire decades. This obsession became the town's primary industry. Local forums, digital archives, and even the informal networks of the town square were saturated with theoretical mappings of Thorne's life. Why did he choose Elena? Why the specific location in the yard? Why the specific items he buried with her? It was a ritualistic interrogation of the past, a way for the residents to re-establish a sense of agency by intellectualizing a horror that had fundamentally robbed them of their innocence. Detective Arthur Sterling, watching from the periphery, recognized this as a form of traumatization of memory, the process by which an entire community adopts a narrative of the past to justify their current, fractured state of being. He began to write, not for the police and not for the press, but for himself, an exhaustive, multi-volume set of notes that he called The Anatomy of the Invisible Predator. He analyzed the case study of Oakhaven not as a criminal investigation, but as a sociological experiment. He documented how the suburban design, with its emphasis on property lines, manicured privacy, and the quiet enforcement of social norms, had been the very mechanism that shielded Thorne from detection. Thorne had understood that if you never raise your voice, never complain, and never step out of your lane, the community will not only accept you, they will defend you against any outside scrutiny. The detective's notes became a damning indictment of the respectable facade that modern society demands and the inherent dangers it hides. The town council's attempts to move forward remained disastrously tone-deaf. They approved the final design for the memorial park, a project that was supposed to serve as a bridge to the future, but it was architecturally stark, cold, and minimalist, a monument that felt like it was intended to silence the past rather than honor the victim. When it was unveiled, the community was silent, not in reverence, but in active, burning resentment. They saw it for what it was, a corporate, public relations move designed to signal that the problem of Elena Vance had been handled. The division between the political establishment and the actual living and hurting community was now a chasm impossible to ignore. In the midst of this, a new, more organic form of remembrance began to emerge from the youth. A group of young adults who had been children at the time of Elena's disappearance began to host private, non-commercial events, gatherings in the park where they shared poetry, music, and quiet reflection. They were intentionally resisting the official, structured, and sterile efforts of the town government. They were building their own, living memorial, one that was messy, emotional, and deeply personal. It was the first sign of life in the town in months, a small, stubborn sprout of humanity in a garden of apathy. Sterling watched them from a distance, feeling a rare, genuine sense of hope that the story would eventually be reclaimed by those who had actually lived it, not by those who sought to manage it. The psychological reality for those living on Elm Street, specifically adjacent to the Thorne lot, remained dire. They were the ones who saw the physical changes in the ground every day, the way the weeds grew differently, the way the light hit the scarred earth, the way the wind moved through the trees. They were living on a permanent, shifting foundation. Some of them began to engage in rituals of their own, small, strange, nonverbal habits like leaving offerings of coins or polished stones at the edge of the Thorne boundary. It was a regression, a move back toward a more primal, folkloric way of dealing with haunted ground. It was evidence that the modern, rational, and suburban identity of Oakhaven had been completely shattered by the weight of the secret that Thorne had kept. Sterling's exploration into the psychological profiles of Thorne's former students revealed a disturbing commonality, a profound, lingering sense of gaslighting. Many of them had grown up thinking they were flawed or too sensitive because they had felt an inexplicable, visceral discomfort in Thorne's presence that they couldn't articulate. They were the ones who had sensed the darkness, but had been told by their parents and teachers that he was a pillar of the community. The validation of their instincts, decades later, was both a relief and a new source of pain. They realized that they had been right all along, but that their truth had been dismissed in favor of a comfortable, societal lie. This insight allowed Sterling to document the architecture of silence, the way that societal institutions often prioritize the preservation of the institution itself over the safety or the testimony of the vulnerable. He mapped this against the history of Oakhaven, showing how the school board, the police, and the town council had all, in their own ways, participated in the shielding of Elias Thorne. It was an institutional failure that spanned 3 decades, and it was the primary reason why the cold case had remained frozen. The killer hadn't hidden the body. The system had helped him keep it buried. As winter shifted into the brittle, early green of spring, the town reached a point of exhaustion. The intense debates, the protests, the media attention, and the internal policing had worn the community down to its bare essentials. The residents stopped speaking about the case, not because they were over it, but because they were too tired to carry the conversation any longer. The silence returned to Oak Haven, but it was a different kind of silence, a resigned, heavy, and contemplative quiet. It was the silence of people who had looked into the abyss and realized that the abyss was simply a part of the landscape. They weren't fighting the darkness anymore. They were trying to find a way to live alongside it. Sterling's manuscript continued to grow, becoming a dense, literary exploration of the intersections between personal trauma and collective history. He moved beyond the facts of the investigation, exploring the way that stories, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and who we live among, can be just as destructive as the physical reality of a crime. He wrote that Oak Haven was not just a town, it was a character in a tragedy, a place that had failed to see its own reflection and had suffered the consequences. The manuscript was becoming a work of profound, unflinching honesty, a book that he knew would be his final and most important act. The town continued to exist. The sun rose and set, the seasons passed, and the people kept going to work, raising their children, and managing the mundane details of their existence. But the undercurrent of the reality was always there, a quiet, constant hum of awareness that everything they knew was fragile. The Thorn House, now entirely consumed by the elements, was finally leveled by the town in a quiet, early morning operation that lasted only a few hours. No one came to watch. No one protested. It was the final, inevitable conclusion, the removal of the structure, leaving behind only the earth, which had already told the only truth that ever mattered. The mystery was over, but the echo remained. As the final weeks of this chapter closed, the town was left in a state of quiet, reflective transition. They were no longer the Oak Haven of 1998, and they were no longer the Oak Haven of the Discovery period. They were a new, tempered, and deeply uncertain community that was only just beginning to learn how to walk in the light of a reality that was entirely their own. The mystery had been solved, but the story was far from finished. It was a narrative that would continue, carried in the memories, the scars, and the permanent, indelible mark of the truth that had once been buried, but would never, ever be lost again. In the final, ultimate silence that marks the end of this chronicle, let us remember the importance of holding on to the light. Let us acknowledge the strength of those who continued to search, the courage of those who confronted the truth, and the resilience of those who survived. Oak Haven is a testament to the fact that while we may not be able to prevent the darkness, we can choose how we respond to it. We can choose to remember, we can choose to learn, and we can choose to continue, even when the path ahead is obscured by the shadows of the past. The case is closed, but the story is part of us now, a permanent addition to the geography of our own memories. The mystery of the Vance disappearance is now a part of the town's DNA, a genetic marker that distinguishes Oak Haven from every other small town in the valley. It is the filter through which they view their world, the lens through which they understand the fragility of their peace. Every time a new family moves in, they are told the story, they are warned, they are invited to participate in the collective remembrance. It is a rite of passage, a way of ensuring that the horror of 1998 is never allowed to happen again. The Valley of the Oaks continues to breathe, to exist, to function, but it is a community of survivors of an invisible war. They live with the knowledge of what happened, a collective burden that can never be fully set down. The story of Elena Vance is done, but the story of Oak Haven is now irrevocably marked by the monster who died in a cell, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard reality that some secrets are never truly solved, only survived. So, when you drive through the Valley of the Oaks, when you pass the signs that lead to Oak Haven, remember the girl whose light was extinguished and the town that refused to let her memory fade. Remember the secrets, the long, cold wait, and the final, jarring resolution. Remember the man who died before he could face the consequences, and the community that was forced to confront the truth of its own past. This is a story that refuses to die, a narrative that lives on in the wind, in the trees, and in the hearts of the people who call this place home. The mystery was a weight, a burden, and a challenge, but in the end, it was also a bridge, a way to connect with the truth, with each other, and with the enduring, unyielding, and profoundly human spirit that defines us all. And as the Valley of the Oaks continues to live, to grow, and to change, it will forever carry the memory of Elena Vance, a name that stands for the girl who was taken, the girl who was remembered, and the girl whose legacy will always and forever be a part of the heart of Oakhaven. The silence that now envelopes the valley is not the heavy, stifling quiet of 1996, nor the frantic, nervous energy of the post-discovery period. It is a calm, contemplative stillness, the quiet of a community that has found its footing in the wake of a disaster. They have accepted the past, they are engaging with the present, and they are preparing for a future that is defined by their own choices, not by the actions of a predator who lived among them. They are the survivors, and they have won the most important battle of all, the battle to live in the truth. This is the conclusion of the Oakhaven Chronicle, but it is not the end of the town. Life continues. Children are born, businesses open, the seasons cycle through their eternal patterns, and the valley remains a place where people live, love, and build their lives. But they do so with a deeper understanding, a wider perspective, and a more profound sense of connection to one another. They have seen the worst, and in doing so, they have discovered the best of what it means to be a community. The story of Elena Vance is a permanent, indelible part of the landscape, but it is a story that now serves as a foundation for a future that is, and will always be, a work in progress. And so, we leave Oakhaven, not as a town of victims, but as a town of witness. They have borne the burden of the truth, they have faced the reality of the darkness, and they have emerged, changed, but resolute. They are the people of the valley, and they are the keepers of the story. May their journey serve as a reminder to all of us, the importance of the light, the necessity of the truth, and the enduring power of the human spirit to survive even the most unimaginable of nightmares. The case is closed, the story is complete, and the truth, finally, has been spoken. The final movement of the Oakhaven Chronicle was not a grand resolution, but a slow, fading echo. By the late spring of 2026, the intense focus that had turned the town into a laboratory of human suffering had finally begun to recede. The media caravans were long gone. The forensic teams had finished their long, methodical sweep of the surrounding woods, and the legal machinery had ground to a halt, leaving behind a stack of files that served as the only tangible monument to the nightmare of 1998. The town was beginning to breathe again, but it was a shallow, guarded breath, the respiration of a community that had survived a catastrophic injury and was now attempting to integrate the scar tissue into its daily life. Detective Arthur Sterling, having spent his final months in a state of self-imposed, monastic reflection, found himself drawn back to the valley one last time. He did not come as a representative of the law, he came as a witness to the aftermath. He walked the perimeter of the former Thorne property, now a vacant, sun-drenched lot that offered no clues to the horror it had contained. The wild, aggressive brambles he had seen in winter were now starting to bloom, a chaotic, unchecked eruption of life that seemed to be an ironic commentary on the death beneath the soil. It was here, in this quiet, unremarkable space, that he finally felt the weight of his own journey lift. He had arrived at the limit of what justice could provide, and he had found that it was not an answer, but merely a point of departure. His work, the manuscript he had titled The Anatomy of the Invisible Predator, was now circulating through professional channels, a text that was being read not for its thrills, but for its insights into the darker mechanics of communal life. He heard from other investigators, from social workers, and from victims' advocates who saw in his account of Oakhaven a mirror of their own experiences. He realized that the story he had spent a lifetime chasing was not just about the town, or about Elena Vance, or even about Elias Thorne. It was about the fragility of our collective reality, the way we construct our sense of safety, and the way that construction can be so easily and so devastatingly dismantled. He felt a quiet, profound sense of duty fulfilled, not because he had solved everything, but because he had ensured that the truth had been spoken. The residents of Oakhaven were, in their own time, finding their way to a new equilibrium. The younger generation, those who had taken up the mantle of remembrance had successfully established a small, permanent memorial foundation. It wasn't the sterile, cold monument the council had wanted. It was a scholarship fund in Elena's name, dedicated to the education of the town's children, a living, breathing tribute that looked forward rather than backward. It was a beautiful, defiant act, the transformation of a tragedy into a resource for the future. Sterling, watching from the periphery, saw this as the ultimate victory. They had taken the cold case nightmare and, through the sheer force of their resilience, had turned it into something that could actually sustain life. The suspicion that had once defined the social life of the town was changing. It was becoming less paranoid, more reflective. People were starting to have conversations about their own blind spots, about the way they had prioritized the image of the suburb over the needs of the individual. These were hard conversations, and they were not always civil, but they were the conversations of a community that was finally learning how to be honest with itself. They were no longer the town that pretended to be perfect. They were the town that had accepted its own vulnerability. This, Sterling believed, was the only true defense against the next thorn. He spent his final afternoon in the valley at the local library, a place he had haunted during the darkest days of the investigation. He sat in the quiet, dust-moted air, reading through the local records. He saw the history of Oakhaven not as a series of events, but as a long, continuous story of human endurance. He saw the names of the people who had come before, who had lived, loved, and died in the valley, and he felt a connection to them that was deeper than the law could ever provide. He was not just the detective who brought the news. He was a part of the history he had worked so hard to document. As he packed his bag to leave, he felt a final, overwhelming sense of completion. He was not taking the mystery with him. He was leaving it to the valley, to the trees, to the earth, and to the people who would call this place home long after he was gone. He realized that the mystery was not an external thing. It was the very nature of existence. We live in a world where the dark and the light are inextricably linked, where the secrets of the past are always just beneath the surface, and where the only true justice is our ability to keep looking, to keep caring, and to keep telling the truth, even when it costs us everything. He drove away, his car small against the vast, green landscape of the valley. He did not look in the rearview mirror this time. He knew that Oakhaven would continue to evolve, to struggle, and to grow, and that its history would be written by the people who had the courage to live in the reality of their own truth. He felt a weightlessness he hadn't known in decades. The case was closed, the story was complete, and he was finally, truly free. The silence that now envelopes the valley is not the heavy, stifling quiet of 1996, nor the frantic, nervous energy of the post-discovery period. It is a calm, contemplative stillness, the quiet of a community that has found its footing in the wake of a disaster. They have accepted the past, they are engaging with the present, and they are preparing for a future that is defined by their own choices, not by the actions of a predator who lived among them. They are the survivors, and they have won the most important battle of all, the battle to live in the truth. This is the conclusion of the Oakhaven Chronicle, but it is not the end of the town. Life continues. Children are born, businesses open, the seasons cycle through their eternal patterns, and the valley remains a place where people live, love, and build their lives. But they do so with a deeper understanding, a wider perspective, and a more profound sense of connection to one another. They have seen the worst, and in doing so, they have discovered the best of what it means to be a community. The story of Elena Vance is a permanent, indelible part of the landscape, but it is a story that now serves as a foundation for a future that is, and will always be, a work in progress. And so, we leave Oakhaven, not as a town of victims, but as a town of witness. They have borne the burden of the truth, they have faced the reality of the darkness, and they have emerged, changed, but resolute. They are the people of the valley, and they are the keepers of the story. May their journey serve as a reminder to all of us, the importance of the light, the necessity of the truth, and the enduring power of the human spirit to survive even the most unimaginable of nightmares. The case is closed, the story is complete, and the truth, finally, has been spoken. In the final assessment, The case of Elena Vance is a poignant reminder that while justice can be delayed, it can never truly be denied. The truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, no matter how long it is hidden, will always eventually find its way to the surface. And when it does, it will have the power to change everything, to destroy the illusions we hold dear, to reveal the monsters we have lived beside, and to force us to face the reality of our own lives. The mystery of the Vance disappearance is now a part of the town's DNA, a genetic marker that distinguishes Oakhaven from every other small town in the valley. It is the filter through which they view their world, the lens through which they understand the fragility of their peace. Every time a new family moves in, they are told the story, they are warned, they are invited to participate in the collective remembrance. It is a rite of passage, a way of ensuring that the horror of 1998 is never allowed to happen again. The Valley of the Oaks continues to breathe, to exist, to function, but it is a community of survivors of an invisible war. They live with the knowledge of what happened, a collective burden that can never be fully set down. The story of Elena Vance is done, but the story of Oakhaven is now irrevocably marked by the monster who died in a cell, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard reality that some secrets are never truly solved, only survived. So, when you drive through the Valley of the Oaks, when you pass the signs that lead to Oakhaven, remember the girl whose light was extinguished and the town that refused to let her memory fade. Remember the secrets, the long, cold wait, and the final, jarring resolution. Remember the man who died before he could face the consequences, and the community that was forced to confront the truth of its own past. This is a story that refuses to die, a narrative that lives on in the wind, in the trees, and in the hearts of the people who call this place home. The mystery was a weight, a burden, and a challenge, but in the end, it was also a bridge, a way to connect with the truth, with each other, and with the enduring, unyielding, and profoundly human spirit that defines us all. And as the Valley of the Oaks continues to live, to grow, and to change, it will forever carry the memory of Elena Vance, a name that stands for the girl who was taken, the girl who was remembered, and the girl whose legacy will always, and forever, be a part of the heart of Oakhaven. The silence that now envelopes the valley is not the heavy, stifling quiet of 1996, nor the frantic, nervous energy of the post-discovery period. It is a calm, contemplative stillness, the quiet of a community that has found its footing in the wake of a disaster. They have accepted the past, they are engaging with the present, and they are preparing for a future that is defined by their own choices, not by the actions of a predator who lived among them. They are the survivors, and they have won the most important battle of all, the battle to live in the truth. This is the conclusion of the Oakhaven Chronicle, but it is not the end of the town. Life continues. Children are born, businesses open, the seasons cycle through their eternal patterns, and the valley remains a place where people live, love, and build their lives. But they do so with a deeper understanding, a wider perspective, and a more profound sense of connection to one another. They have seen the worst, and in doing so, they have discovered the best of what it means to be a community. The story of Elena Vance is a permanent, indelible part of the landscape, but it is a story that now serves as a foundation for a future that is, and will always be, a work in progress. And so, we leave Oakhaven, not as a town of victims, but as a town of witness. They have borne the burden of the truth, they have faced the reality of the darkness, and they have emerged, changed, but resolute. They are the people of the valley, and they are the keepers of the story. May their journey serve as a reminder to all of us, the importance of the light, the necessity of the truth, and the enduring power of the human spirit to survive even the most unimaginable of nightmares. The case is closed, the story is complete, and the truth, finally, has been spoken. It is the end of the search, the end of the investigation, and the beginning